Welcome back to our 5 questions, 5 answers series, and thank you for being a part of it. My name is Nikole Babb, news reporter for the Butler County Times-Gazette. This week I'm interviewing David Dillner, the city manager for the city of El Dorado. I chose to interview David this week because he oversees many projects and policies within the city of El Dorado, which gives him in my opinion, a unique perspective on El Dorado's needs. So David, go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourself and the role your organization plays for our community.
Sure. Well, I've been city manager here for 7 years, and people often ask, what does a city manager do? And in essence, the city manager serves as the CEO of the municipal government. So I provide guidance and direction to the city commission, or really guidance and policy direction, and then they provide really the direction they want to go back to me, and I translate that back to staff so that we can have the commission's priorities organized, and we develop our budget around that, so I help with that process, and then generally oversee projects and initiatives to make sure that they align and coincide with the commission's priorities for the community.
Great. Well, it's great to have you here on our community conversation, so thank you again. And maybe you can tell us the most impactful thing that the city of El Dorado did in 2023.
Well, I think the most impactful thing is probably something that we haven't really seen yet. Mm-hmm. And what I mean by that is we've been doing a lot of background work on our $3 million base grant projects. So we have, in essence, 3 projects that we will be bidding and beginning construction this year in earnest, and those projects will be very impactful from a number of ways. Number one, they're going to be pretty disruptive for the time that they're being constructed, and then secondly, once they're done, they'll be impactful because they're basically providing better services now, but they're also facilitating or providing us with the opportunity to serve future development that may come as a result of our industrial marketing campaigns. So we've got a water line replacement that will be happening on Central, and then with that there will be some stormwater improvements as well as some pavement improvements, and then we will have the Constant Creek Sanitary Sewer Interceptor project, which will be on the west end of town. This project won't be as disruptive because for the most part it will parallel Constant Creek, which is luckily not along a major roadway. It's actually kind of off the beaten path, if you will. But there will be some impact to the public as that project is going on. And then the third piece of that project is site certification and clearing of some industrial ground that we are actively marketing for industrial development now. So again, a lot of that's been taking place behind the scenes as we get our engineering done, but we are getting to the point where we will be bidding that work, and then we'll be starting construction very soon.
Wonderful. Well, that's very exciting for, I think, the whole city.
Yeah.
And so we'll just move on here. Thank you very much for taking the time to speak with us today. Our goal this year is to find our role in the community better than ever and to understand our community better than ever as well. So our 5 questions, 5 answers series is an opportunity for us to ask the same 5 questions to different stakeholders and individual community leaders, just like you, throughout the country. We're implementing this into all of our newspapers, so it's kind of a cool initiative.
Okay.
And we chose you again because you represent the inner workings of the city of El Dorado. We're looking for different perspectives that everyone will bring to our project. So we'll move on to our first question. The first one is the most important, and if you can just tell us what are the most pressing challenges facing our community at a local level right now?
Well, I think that one of the challenges that we are dealing with, and we will be putting together a very specific plan for in the coming weeks, is to address housing needs. Many communities in Kansas have a lack of housing. We recently completed a housing assessment that gave us an overview of kind of the housing needs that our community needs. Right now, we don't have a lot of houses that you can go out and buy. So if you're trying to move to El Dorado, there's not really a lot of inventory that's available for you to look at and then ultimately consider for buying. And so if our community wants to grow, if we want to draw people into our community, we need to have options for them to look at from a housing standpoint, whether that be starter homes for first-time home buyers. It could be rental units for people that maybe are not ready to purchase their first home. And it could be housing for maybe seniors to downsize into, because maybe they're in a house that they've outgrown because their kids have moved away, and maybe they want something smaller with maybe a little bit less maintenance responsibilities. So trying to figure out what those needs are, and then figuring out strategies to facilitate those housing needs. We also, and kind of related to that, as you know, we've had some conversation about the homeless in our community, and what do we do to help with that situation. So that's all kind of related to housing in one way or another. And then I've been talking a lot about infrastructure, and so just outlining infrastructure projects that we're going to do now, as well as kind of planning out what we're going to do in the future to make sure that our community has the assets that it needs now, but also assets that will allow our community to have a good quality of life moving forward as well.
Yeah. So touching on the housing topic, I think, is always a hot topic, because I feel like our community in Butler County has grown fast since COVID. A lot of people are more interested in the rural life, the slower streets, and that community feel. So how, but with that comes, different financial levels, right? And so how do you guys, or if you guys have even come up with a plan yet, how do you plan on addressing affordable housing needs as well?
Yeah, so there's a number of strategies to do that. One strategy is to apply for federal or state grants that are available for housing specifically. And a lot of those programs, like for example, the state of Kansas has a moderate income housing grant that we have recently applied for with a developer who is looking to build about 35 homes in our community. And if we're able to get that grant, what it does is it reduces the overall cost to the developer, who then can reduce the cost of the units to a potential home buyer and or renter. The problem is that those grants are very competitive. And so when you have a lot of cities in Kansas competing for what seems to be a small amount of money, then you have to kind of get creative and kind of figure out what to do about that. So obviously we'll apply for state grants, but we're also looking at local ways that we can free up some money to provide kind of the same incentive, if you will, to reduce the overall cost of development to developers, so they can reduce that cost to future home buyers and or renters. In addition, we also have some opportunities to utilize some state incentive programs. Well, more like state statutes that give us the ability locally to incentivize housing. And one of those is the Reinvestment Housing Incentive District, formerly known as the Rural Housing Incentive District, which gives the cities the ability to use or capture taxes created by new development to incentivize those developments. And so we're looking at that as a mechanism to really jumpstart housing opportunities in El Dorado.
Wonderful. That sounds awesome. We'll move on to our next question here. And that is, considering the evolving media landscape, what role do you see local newspapers like us playing in the community 5 years from now?
So I would say that the media environment is very, very decentralized right now, and people can get their news from a lot of variety of different sources, blogs, online newspapers, TV, streaming now is huge. But one of the things that all of that seems to lack is local news. And so the local newspaper, I think, can play a real vital role in providing citizens with timely and accurate local news so they can understand what's going on in their community. I think that's one of the most important things that local newspapers can do. I think anybody can provide national and state news, but getting that local news and that local piece is so important for communities.
I agree completely. And are there any emerging trends that you see right now that you think the newspaper should embrace?
I don't know about trends, but I think covering just generally covering city commission meetings, and we have a lot of good stuff that's taking place in our advisory committees as well, that kind of starts there and then moves its way up to the city commission. So getting coverage of that, I think those two things are kind of the key pieces. In terms of trends and how that's done, I don't know, podcasts or videos. I think they're called kind of like vlogs or vlogs, or I don't know what they're called, but
yeah.
I think people have different ways of getting information, and if the newspaper can kind of utilize as many of those as possible, then people can kind of choose what works best for them.
I like that answer. The next question number 3. In your opinion, what role should our newspaper play in promoting civic participation and community involvement?
So there are a lot of activities, a lot of events that take place in our community, and one of the challenges that I think we've had is just organizing a community calendar. I think communities have a challenge with that in a number of respects, like who's going to manage it, who can add to it, and those kind of things. But I think sometimes it's even more simpler than that, and it's just putting a news article in the paper about an upcoming event. So doing a community calendar, or even just promoting or making available on the newspaper's website, for example, existing calendars that might be available. It's hard to aggregate all that information, and then figuring out, what are you going to promote, because there's nonprofit events, there's school events, there's city events, and then your calendar can just be so inundated, it's hard to do that. So, but I would say that the more that information is out there, we utilize Facebook and social media, but not everybody receives that information from us. So I think sharing that information as much as we can with all of our entities, and the more distributed it can get is probably the best way.
For sure. Can you share examples of some successful community engagement initiatives that you've seen in other areas?
So one thing that we recently rolled out that I think is relatively successful, the city has an excess sales tax program where whatever money's left over after property tax reduction in streets, the community through this excess sales tax committee can determine how that money is going to be, or can make a recommendation to the commission on how that money should be spent. This year, we rolled out a tool called the Balancing Act tool, and what that does is it allows us to put all those projects out there, and the public can basically allocate funds to those projects based on the budget that we have. So let's say, for example, this year we had $1 million, and we had over $2 million worth of projects that were proposed. And so the public can go in and they can review those projects, and they can vote for the ones that they think are more applicable or more useful to the community. And we can take that information back to the committee and say, the committee or the public has kind of provided this input for your information. So I think that was helpful. It kind of helped inform the committee. Instead of going out and talking to 400 people, they got the information instantly, and provides a good opportunity for the public to engage in that process. So we're looking at different tools like that to provide the public with an opportunity to provide input, not only in excess sales tax, but we're going to roll it out for the general budget here later on this year. And we also have a pretty strong and robust social media following as well. So we get a lot of input and feedback from that as well.
Yeah, and I did see the surveys. I think those are really cool, because instead of, listening to maybe just the groups that come to the commission meetings or whatever other meetings, voicing their opinions, you can get thousands, hundreds of voices instantly in a week.
Yep.
Which is great, and so that helps with getting people's voices heard.
Yeah.
And that's the number one, priority, and in my opinion too, would be hearing out those voices and making sure they're heard within the city. So, what community events or activities do you believe our newspaper should cover to better connect with our residents?
Well, that's a good question. I think that, we have events that are organized by the Chamber. We have events that are organized by Main Street, Experience Dorado, and then we have a whole bunch of other events that are organized by a number of other activities or a number of other entities. And so obviously you can't cover them all. People want to know what's going on at the school, and that's obviously important. But I would just say trying to keep the ear to the ground in terms of what these organizations are doing, and kind of broadcasting that so people can understand would be one thing that I would kind of offer.
Sure. And our last question, number 5, considering the current economic landscape, how can our newspaper support local businesses and contribute to economic growth in the community?
So I think that local newspapers have struggled over the last, we'll say, decade. But so a lot of newspapers have struggled. They've cut back staff because of that. And but I think the answer is, if a local newspaper sticks with the local stories and provides good coverage of those stories and keeps people informed, then the output of that is that local businesses will be willing to advertise, and it creates a revenue stream that can hopefully create that loop. So I would say that that's kind of the benefit to businesses, is that if the newspaper provides good, local, accurate information to the community, and I get a subscriber base, then as a business I would be willing to advertise, and then that creates more revenue for the newspaper, so they can do a real good job of providing local news. And then so it's kind of a good feedback loop of doing that. I would say that the local newspaper here, largely because of forces that it can't control, has had to kind of scale back. But it used to be, back in the good old days.
Yeah,
back in the day, it used to be you'd have a 5-day paper, and people could get in that paper, and they could read and find out what's going on. And now our newspaper is twice a week, which is fine. But trying to figure out, that it's harder now, because the newspaper is only 2 days a week, and it's not very thick. So trying to figure out and prioritize what those news stories are to capture the attention of the community, so that they are engaged in that information.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing and being a part of our 5 questions and 5 answers series this week. Before we leave, I'll ask one question.
Okay.
And so what question that can we ask the community in our upcoming survey that your organization would like the answer to?
I would say that if the community addressed one thing to make an impact on the overall quality of life in the community, what one thing would that be?
Okay. Well, you heard David. What is the one thing that the city can address that would impact the community best or greatly? Okay. Well, that's it for this week's interview. You can catch us next week as we interview a different sector in our community. And please help us spread this conversation. Share this video and let us know what you think about our conversation on our Facebook page, or you can comment on this video as well. And see you next week.